Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Finally, a place to talk about the truth. Welcome to episode 56. Today we are talking about housing that heals. It is so essential for so many with serious mental illness. And our guests today they're two California moms on a mission for a system of care that works. This is so near and dear to all of our hearts here on Three Moms, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. So I'm Randy Kay. I'm here with Mindy Greiling and Mimi Painter. In a moment, you'll meet our guests, Teresa and Lauren. But let's take a minute and talk about housing, because many of our listeners are just at the beginning of their journeys and their loved ones are living with them. And housing is a key to independence and key to so many things. And we'll talk about that in a second. Let me tell you a bit about Teresa and Lauren. And this is straight from the NAMI website, Housing That Heals Project. It says, as two California moms on a mission, we invite you to join our journey across the state, their state happening to be California, and our future dreams for housing that heals for families like ours. We assume if you're listening, you are a family like ours. Housing that heals is more than a house, a program, or a room key. It's a system of care that wraps a person and all the necessary medical, clinical, rehabilitative, and social supports they need in order to live and die in dignity. And boy, does that sound good. We have done some shows on that. So let's just begin with a really quick summary of where our sons are now in terms of housing, and then we're going to question our guests. So since I have the mic, I'll begin by saying my son, whom I call Ben in all my correspondence about our situation, he's 40. And so he was in a group home for a while after being homeless and a bunch of other things. Then he lived back at home with us for 9 years. Then in COVID, he had a breakdown and went back in the hospital. And after that, we decided it really was best for everybody concerned for him to go back into housing. It was a process, and he is currently being housed in a state-run group home in Connecticut. I'm actually very pleased with the care he's getting, but it is temporary housing. He can't stay there for the rest of his life. But what it gives him at the moment is somebody to answer to besides me. And it gives him a different neighborhood to live in, some people who are in the same boat as he is, so some community, and he has a very caring staff. But I do know that this isn't forever, but I'm grateful for the time. So that's a bit about me. Mimi, where's your son?
Right now we're in a very good situation. He lives in subsidized housing that is basically for elderly people and people with disabilities, but we were able to umbrella him into this. So the good thing about it is it's permanent. He can stay here as long as he wants, and it's incredibly affordable. There's not much in the way of staff because basically there's an office and there's a maintenance guy and a woman who runs the building, but they're very sensitive to the situation of their different tenants. And it's the first place we've been in where because everywhere else he's been has been just regular apartments. And that's just been this drama of always being afraid of being found out or thrown out or, having a problem with some aberrant behavior or something like that. And here they're very understanding and supportive. And it's actually turning out to be a great living arrangement because there's a lot of older people who are, kind of maternal and concerned, and they look out after each other. So we're very, very lucky we fell into this.
Awesome. Thank you. And Mindy?
And I just have to say, I got to meet both Lauren and Teresa in person in San Antonio at the Treatment Advocacy Center conference just recently. So it's so wonderful to have you on the program, two such articulate and both with a great sense of purpose for our common situations. So Jim has lived in a variety of places, but I'm really interested in this program because right now he's not in housing that heals. He's in his own apartment. It's a beautiful apartment. He has a rent voucher, so he pays 40% or less of his income in Minneapolis by the Mississippi River in a very high rent area. But he's right in downstairs in the basement right now with my husband in our house because there is absolutely no support there. He's just all by himself in a lonely apartment. And so he's at our house in his old bedroom and has been here for the last 3 years. We couldn't let him do that when he wasn't doing well. Right now he's sober, he's doing well. So this is an option, but it won't last. My husband, he's 45 and my husband is 78 and I'm 74. So this is our biggest fear. What when we can't?
Yeah.
So that's where we are. And, not bad for any of us, but I will say my son has been in a place where the minute he started doing well, he got kicked up to his own apartment where he just failed. So there's a lot going on. Let's bring in our guests. We have Lauren Rettagliata. Do I have that right? Teresa Pasquini, two California moms on a mission. So let me just let you tell your story. Tell me about the experiences that you have had, as much as you can, that make housing so important to you. And by the way, welcome to the podcast. Teresa, do you want to start?
I'm happy to start. Thank you so very much for having us. It's really a pleasure to meet you all and to be in this conversation together. I am the proud mom of an adult son who lives heroically with schizophrenia. And that's my usual introduction that I've used over the years to make people kind of go, wow. I've had people turn their heads when I make that introduction, like, wow, I've never heard that, proud mom of an adult son with schizophrenia. So I do speak publicly about our story, and I've done that intentionally. So my beloved son, Danny, is 40 years old. And he's fallen through every jagged edge of every broken piece of the California public, private, and criminal justice system. He's currently living in the community for the first time in 20 years. He spent the majority of his adult life in locked facilities. And he's been on what California calls an LPS conservatorship for the past 20 years. And so this was
explain LPS conservatorship, if you could.
So the LPS conservatorship in California is a conservatorship for those with serious mental illness. So those with mental illnesses, not medical illnesses, and it's you can either have a public guardianship or a private guardian, or you can be your child's guardian. We were advised not to be Danny's conservator. And basically what happened was it was the third hospitalization. When he turned 18, he fell off the cliff into the adult mental health system. He had been diagnosed at 16. We thought we had managed his care. He was doing awesome. He graduated from high school. And then literally on his 18th birthday, he was 5150'd and hospitalized. And that was when the HIPAA hammer came down, and, I knew he was at the hospital, but when I called, they said, sorry, Mom, we can't tell you whether he's here or not. And so we started going through that dance. So that started the revolving hospitalizations. And it was, I think, after maybe the third hospitalization that year, we received papers from our county guardian's office, the public guardians, talking about a temporary conservatorship. And I was terrified. I had no idea what it meant. Went to my girlfriend, what does this mean? And so when I called the office, it was actually the public guardian that I spoke to, who became a dear friend. And he said to us, "Why do you keep bringing him home? He's very sick." And that was kind of shocking. And it's like, because I'm his mom, because he's sick, because he, and so it was like, kind of like, and he's like, "Well, you need to talk to this other mom, and you need to get some information because he's really sick. He needs long-term care. And basically you need to hear how to make that happen." So that was 20 years ago. And, what happened was there was a conservatorship. And that was, there was also another experience with a psychiatrist who actually told my husband and I, you'd be really lucky if you got him into the criminal justice system. And he said it as if, you were applying to Stanford or Cal, and,
Wow.
And it's like, so this is how we were introduced to the mental health system of California, and for the adult mental health system. And so that started the past 20 years of revolving hospitalizations, sent to live in 9 different counties in California. Sometimes we would have to travel, an hour and a half away to visit Danny. We tried to visit him every weekend. And this was a civil commitment, not a criminal. This was not the criminal system. I was like, okay, after they said that to me, I am not going to make, my son's not going to be homeless and he's not going to ever be in jail, was my, promise. Well, that didn't work out. But so anyway, so we've had these experiences for the last 20 years and literally been in every level of care in the state of California, and had the experience of going behind many, many locked doors, and having Danny wait for the step down, having him wait for the step up. And it was, after he was arrested as a patient in a hospital and criminalized for his mental illness, that we were thrown into the criminal justice system, and luck and heroics rescued him from that nightmare after 4 years of off and on solitary confinement and being shuffled to 2 state hospitals.
Wow.
So,
I mean, this story, we could do 45 minutes on your story alone. So I'm going to, but there's so many questions about that. But since we're talking about housing that heals, can we bring it up to the modern time and your mission? And I want to hear Lauren's story.
Absolutely. As well. And I'm sorry, but it was based on all of that.
No, I know it's the stories are long. No, we get it.
Based on all of that, once he was out of that, I was determined to see him in a community setting, out of a locked door as soon as he was able. I have no problem with involuntary care if it's medically necessary, and it was. And it also was necessary to get him out of the criminal justice system. So where did he go? Where was he going to go after this locked facility? And that's when I started doing research and found out about this place called Synergy in Morgan Hill in Santa Clara, California. And I will leave it there. I'll pass it to Lauren, who also has had the experience with Synergy, but I will say that Danny is currently living at Synergy. It was his first successful transition from a locked facility in 20 years. He's been living at Synergy now for 3 years. And has not been rehospitalized, has not, he's living, it's a congregate kind of setting. It's paid for by the county because of his conservatorship. It's paid for by the Mental Health Service Act, California's millionaire's tax. And he's doing great. And it's what I call a gold star model of housing that heals.
And I can't wait after we hear from Lauren to hear more about it. And maybe others listening are Facebook friends with Teresa, but she has the Danny Days that she does on Facebook. And those are so heartwarming. And he's so mellow right now. So I want to hear more about how the housing contributes to that. But Lauren.
Right. And then, of course, part of tonight's program will be how can we get more places like that in other states, which I'm sure is part of your mission. Because right now I'm here in Fairy Tale. It just feels like just the end part. Lauren, and thank you, Teresa. I'm so glad to hear he's doing well. Lauren, how about you? What would you like to contribute to this?
Well, whenever anyone starts and at beginning to ask me questions, they say, why are you so passionate about housing? Why is it with everything that has to be done that you're just keen in on housing? And that is because I've been at this for a long time. I have four sons. The oldest is 50 and the youngest is 43. The two bookends, the oldest and the youngest, have experienced some real challenges in their life. In 1974, we brought our son home from a meeting at Stanford University where they informed us that our son had a new term that we probably hadn't heard, but I actually knew a lot about it, and that was autism. But they said, we hate to tell you, it's not called autism medically yet. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that we're still going by, it is classified as childhood schizophrenia. And so I worked really hard with the Association for Retarded Citizens, now called ARC, and everyone, and people in the autism groups were just beginning to form. And we worked really, really hard to get a reclassification on autism into being a neurological disability. Much like your developmental disabilities that have mental retardation are, that there's a big difference between developmental disabilities and those with a serious mental illness, as you all know. I jumped into housing because we were very active to get our child the schooling he needed through the ARC in Northwest Harris County. And we also were burdened by the state. The state told us that they were now, and we've been working very hard, that they were going to open up the state schools. And the children and the adults that were living in the state schools were now coming home to the community. So we had a lot of work to do in a very short time. It was a 2.5-year period of time that we had to work on this with a lot of other families, and in particular 5 families. My husband and I and those families worked to form our own nonprofit called Reach Unlimited that is still alive and growing today. They don't even remember who we are. It was over 40 years ago, but it was remarkable. And that's where why I'm so passionate about this severe mental illness. I haven't experienced the open arms and the funding that were laid before us. We did, as a group, have to mortgage our homes for a short time and take a second mortgage out while we waited for the state funds and the federal funds to come in. But the state funds and the federal funds flowed in to actually provide the housing. We started out with one large group home and one day facility for the people that were living there and the people who were living in their family homes that could come. And today there are over, last count, 10 group homes and over 350 apartments. And I haven't been in touch with these people in a long time. Fast forward, we moved to about 14 years later, we moved to Colorado. I use my expertise in housing to rescue the center, the YWCA, which was the only center for women and children who were had domestic violence issues, and also homeless women who were on the street in Pueblo. And there again, there weren't the roadblocks that we now experience in California. The funding opened in an 18-month period. We were able to raise over $2.5 million, which then brought in many other dollars with it. My son.
So, yeah, go ahead. Your son?
My son today, my youngest son, has been everywhere that you have mentioned that your sons have been. He has been in flea bag board and cares. He has been homeless. He has been in very good facilities, but the moment he gets out of these facilities, he reverts back. I am very worried about my son right now. My son is in a locked facility for the first time in his life. Hopefully, because he is conserved, he will be able to stay there long enough to actually benefit from taking medication and hopefully be able to kick the street drug habits that many people get into. The locked door that I'm worried about is the locked door that my son was in a housing first situation. He was placed in his own apartment and he was given the highest type of treatment and care wraparound facilities available in our state. One is called a full service partnership and one is called assisted outpatient treatment. And the police on 2 occasions had to actually go through those doors and get my son. My son was comatose on both occasions and brought to our county hospital. We are very fortunate because in our county, we have a psych emergency hospital where my son was able to actually come back to life. I mean, they actually brought him back to life on 2 occasions.
Well, so, you guys have certainly, you certainly are living the chutes and ladders situation of all families. And we totally resonate with your stories. And I would love to channel the rest of this episode to how you did what you did. And you've mentioned it a little bit, but also, you know, Mimi and Mindy have other questions. All of us here, all 5 moms here, all 5 proud moms here are pretty advanced in our journeys. We've been through a lot. We've created a lot. There have been obstacles, and I'd love if we could focus a bit on why we need housing, what's wrong with housing the way it is, what we can do for our loved ones, and especially thinking about families that are just more at the beginning of that journey. You know, what to fight for, how to fight for it, what do we need? You know, what does housing that heals really mean? You know, what works, what doesn't work. So I think that's part of, you know, what we want to talk about. And, you know, honestly, I could do an hour episode with each of you, just hearing your stories. But Mindy, why don't you ask the next question and see if we can continue to focus this wonderful story.
I have, Lauren, you mentioned, you know, that one of your children on the bookends has had the autism spectrum diagnosis. And I have across the street from me a family with 2 children with autism, and the mother used to work at the Autism Society of Minnesota. And she said when she talked to families about getting services for their children, as often as a lot of us know, kids with developmental disabilities or autism also have mental illnesses. And so she said when she advised families whether to go to the mental health system or the developmental disability system, always go to the developmental disability system, that you won't like the mental health system. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about that, because at least in Minnesota, and I'm guessing it's the same all around the country, there's, you know, quite a robust system of group homes and various housing situations for people with developmental disabilities compared to the dearth of places for people with mental illnesses. And could you comment on that, or how did that happen, or what can we do about that?
There is the disparity between the services those with an SMI and housing receive and those that have autism or any other developmental disabilities is actually hardwired into our system in California. And I don't know how it is in all the other states, but the developmental disabilities organized a lot sooner. And they also had many court cases that helped them out in our state. And there was the Lanterman Act, which is actually hardwired into our Welfare and Institutions Code, which brings a lot of money for housing. not so much for treatment if you happen to also have a developmental disability and need mental health, but for the housing, the disparity in our state right now is getting like $9,900 a month for the most severe cases on the developmental disability spectrum, and you get about $1,200 for this severe mental illness. Now, there are other patches of money that many counties put through. We in California have the Mental Health Services Act, which taxed our millionaires 1%. So there's money that flows sometimes, but nowhere near enough to facilities. They, in no case will they receive the amount of money that those with a developmental disability gets. So there's a disparity right there. That's why you'll find enough group homes and facilities for those with a developmental disability, but not that many for people with a severe mental illness. So I'm going to pass it on over to Teresa, because she probably has something she wants to add on this too.
No, I think you're shaking your head, so I'm assuming Lauren has explained it pretty well. Mimi, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, I think something that needs to be really drilled into the heads of the rest of the world is that housing is a component in mental health medical treatment that is indispensable. There's not any other disease where we have to consider housing as important as the actual treatment itself, because we know for our kids it has to do with the stability of their treatment and all of that. And I'm just wondering how ideology drives the disparity between people who have an illness other than serious mental illness and people with mental illness in terms of housing. Because my feeling is that it doesn't seem to be regarded as the the vital component that it is.
So I think that that ideology and fiscal discrimination are critically important pieces of this disparity. This disparity in access to care and housing and treatment. And so I think that there's this one size fits all narrative that, that everybody can get well if that can volunteer to go into I call it the recovery bubble. Everybody can, magically get well. Just give them a house and a room and, everything's going to be okay. Well, my son had a house. He had a room and, it wasn't working out here. And it wasn't, he wasn't going to survive here. Number one, there were multiple suicide attempts here. We, like you, or I think it was Randy, that we made the decision also not to bring our son home. We had him living with us many, many times. And, the final straw was when my husband found Danny with a rope in our garage. And it was, I just couldn't let him die on my watch. And so the ideology, it's something that infuriates me, infuriates all of us. It's unfair. It's discrimination. It's wrong. And, we've spent 60 years fighting this discrimination. And, we're sort of lumped into the big disabilities bucket. And, we have so-called entitlements through, the ADA and ACA, et cetera. But when it comes to people with grave disability who, don't even know if they're ill, there is no access to the right door. at the right time. And that was my lived experience. That was our lived experience, is that, you know, we just kept hitting all these wrong doors. And, you know, so, and I believe it was based on the myth that everybody can recover if, you know, if they're given a peer and a room. And, you know, I think that works for so many people, and I'm thrilled for them. And, you know, but that's not working. That didn't work for my family, and the suffering was unacceptable. And I know that it's suffering that's happening across my state and across my country. So that was why we went on this journey, and we had no intention of, you know, being on a podcast, you know, this is, you know, being on a podcast talking about it, or, you know, presenting. We presented this paper now so many times because it resonated with so many people. You know, this is the sweet spot that families like ours, especially the older population. And Randy, you ask about, you know, the younger generation. I'm honestly, I can't even think about the younger. I'm worried about, you know, moms and dads our age, you know, that are worrying about what's going to happen when we're gone. And this is a question that I've heard asked in meetings for the past 20 years, and it's time to answer it. And that's really, you know, that's what our paper was intended to do, was to start a conversation, and to, you know, it's an open source paper. It was, you know, we're not housing providers. We don't have our own organization. We're just two moms, and but we're telling a story, and it's resonating with moms across the country. It's housing that nobody has been talking about.
I was so impressed that you made it into the New York Times with your story. And I read about the two of you driving around California looking for good housing. Could you talk a little bit about that before you talk about the good housing? This process that you used, I just thought, two kick-butt moms that got in the car, drove around, spent their time doing this research that you're now sharing. But talk about that driving around and some of the—
Yes, and just for a time check, we have about 12 minutes left. So I do want to hear about that journey. I do want to hear about the paper, and, you know, tips that you may have as well. So yeah, tell us about that journey.
What got us in the car was that we had heard about some really remarkable places, and both Teresa and I were on the mental health commission of our county. So we had asked many probing questions of where the fund, how much money was spent for people who had a severe mental illness when they went into the hospitals. So we knew how very expensive it was to keep people in situations. We wanted to go and take a look now at where are these best places. Let's go see them, and let's ask them some questions. Let's ask them, how much does it cost? Who is on your staff? Where do you get your funding? One of our first places that we went to, of course, is privately funded. But this is the big wake-up call. It cost, when we went in 2019, it was about $42,000 a year for families to keep their people there, to keep their loved one there. Now, that's almost out of the reach of everyone's pocketbook. But we then started to think, we were beginning to see articles in the newspaper where that San Francisco had identified that it costs them at least $41,000. And that didn't even count the medical and the police emergency funds that were used to keep someone on the street.
And this was to stay in someone's own apartment or in a group home? I don't understand.
On the street, in the gutter, to use the street and the gutter as your latrine, your private open latrine. That costs the city that costs to keep somebody on the street in a city. Minimally, it costs 41. Now we're getting estimates from San Diego and other cities saying, no, let's be realistic. It's more like $68,000 a year.
Oh my gosh.
On the street. Now, if you look into the jails, the jails are even higher. They're even higher to keep someone in the jail. So what we knew is how do we get the people in the public sector to realize they'll be much better off if they can duplicate and replicate these models in our public system? Because unless you are one of those multi-millionaires, you are not going to be able to take care of your loved one in a humane and dignified manner for the rest for their life. Because many people don't, though medication helps many people don't get completely well on medication, and they get relapsing and remitting periods in their life. So that's what drove us to see. I think initially we saw about 22 places. We've seen even more than that now. So I know we've shot on time.
So what were you looking for in for something to qualify as housing that heals?
So the first place we went to was called John Henry Foundation, and and we just were blown away. And I know we have friends that have their loved ones there, and so it was just, we were blown away by what their outcomes were, what the conditions were, but again, private pay. So we had no clue. We left John Henry and we drove home. We're in Northern California. This was Southern California. We drove home going, we have to do something. We have to write this. And so that was the first trip we took. And so we decided that we wanted to go to a variety of places. So we went to homeless shelters. We went to an IMD, a locked IMD. We went to we went to permanent supportive housing providers. We were trying to compare all these different places, and we didn't really rate. We tried not to give gold stars to them, like good or bad, because we need them all. We didn't want to say, oh, that's a bad one, right? So we came up, we decided to use the Institute of Medicine's IOM 6 quality standards, which are the standards that are used for hospital-based care. And we thought, well, why not use these quality criteria for housing that heals? And it's just really kind of a guideline and a guidance. Again, we're looking to go from scarcity to abundance. We don't have enough. We can't get people off the streets, out of hospitals. We can't get them out of jails. We need to think about not only the quality, but the quantity, and how we can scale up this model and stop the suffering. And we also need to talk about forever housing that heals. So you talk about, Randy, your son not being able to stay. My son is not in a forever housing that heals home either. And he is now wanting, he wants his own place. He wants to move on, but we know that if we put him in an apartment, he's going to fall off the cliff again, and it's going to start all over. So
yeah, we hear story after story after story. And I know my son is he's just qualifying for Section 8. I have to fill out the paperwork tomorrow. And it terrifies me that he'll get to his own apartment because he'll fall apart. We've been there before. So yeah.
And that's the thing that I was talking about, where it just is not regarded as the integral piece of the puzzle that it is. And I mean,
this is the housing nobody's talking about.
Yeah,
exactly. So let's,
and that's
in the
why
last 5 minutes, in the last 5 minutes that we have, let's talk about what you found, what's in your paper, and is it possible for housing like this, with the work you're doing and maybe with other people joining your project, is it possible for housing like this to be accessible for people like, I can't afford $68,000 a year for my son to, what can we all do in our own states, in our own towns, or, can we start by reading your paper? We know that housing that heals is so important. We've had International Clubhouse on the podcast. We've had representatives of a place, Fellowship Place in New Haven, like amazing housing, but their waiting lists are 8 years long. So what works and what can we do to make it happen? I know that's a tall, big question to ask, but that's where we have to get to with this. So we want to know about your paper and what we can do.
Our paper was, oh, go ahead, Lauren, sorry.
I just think we have to be heard, and I don't think we're being heard by the powers that be. In our state, we have over $15 billion, not million, $1 billion that the Governor Newsom has put out to combat homelessness. Now, all of our children, maybe at one time or another, have been homeless, but the homeless type of facilities that they are building, they meet the HUD requirements. And the HUD requirements are they have to be housing first, and they also have to follow the harm reduction model. So if someone who has a serious mental illness also has a drug problem, harm reduction isn't going to work for them. They're almost always in our state, the money is being given to scattered site housing. And that housing, the facilities that we need are housing. They are housing, but they are in what more like an enclave. Envision more smaller college campuses where you have housing, where there is a community, where the staff is on site. What we have to do is we have to get our behavioral health directors in our state, in our counties. We have to get those who actually run these programs to understand that the scattered site housing, that putting somebody in an apartment all by themselves doesn't work because they lock the door. It isn't that there aren't case managers and treatment teams going out to see them. They're just not opening the door because in their incidents, they don't have a mental illness. They don't want to take the medication. So we're just setting them up for disaster. And it is advocacy and getting to the powers that be and getting at the state level that we need to work on. We're not a nonprofit. We have no dreams of becoming a nonprofit, but we need moms and dads and other loved ones to join with us and get our message to our state capitals and to our counties. In our state, it's at the county level that this happens.
After the New York Times, did you get any kind of feedback around the country? Was there any movement in your state, or did that fall on deaf ears? Because that's a pretty high platform.
We've been invited to many tables, and we got a lot of it. We've got a lot of attention. It definitely resonated. And we've been very fortunate. We've developed partnerships here in the state, and we're all learning together. We're sharing. We're learning, and the chickens have come home to roost. And mainly because of lawsuits. And, it's lawsuits, too many people living on the streets, too many people living behind locked doors, and too many people living in jail who are seriously mentally ill. And
sometimes lawsuits are needed. Before we go, I would like to hear, since both of your sons are at Synergy, I don't want us to run out of time before you describe Synergy.
My son is not at Synergy. He was. He was, but he actually brought drugs into the facility. I have a feeling, I'm not quite sure. HIPAA does not allow them to tell me why he was told he had to leave the facility, but my son was there as private pay because when he was found comatose on the floor of his apartment, when we got him well enough, we couldn't put him back there. And that was the only thing that was available to us in our county.
This drives me nuts that they can.
I was there. It was the
people
best.
Out. They can charge them with crimes in the hospital, as you described. My son's had that too. They can be kicked out when they're desperately sick. My son has had that too. We don't do that to anybody else who's that sick. So Teresa, I guess and
That's-
that your son
It's
is
me.
there.
I
So-
would love to share. I would love to share about Synergy. It's been a dream placement for us. And, I think that's the secret sauce for Synergy has been the fact that they have a specialty mental health clinic that's right next door. And there's a residence, there's about 70 people. Danny does share a room, and that's not ideal. And that's, I dream of him having his own room one day. That's something every adult male should have, is their own room. And so that's housing that heals for me too. But so what makes Synergy so special is their therapeutic community model and their hospitality model. And their clinical staff that is literally right outside the door. So instead of having to, get in a car and drive to see your psychiatrist, or, get on a teleprompter or whatever, telehealth, Danny can walk right outside the door, walk around, go upstairs, knock on the door and say, "Hey, Dr. Lily, I'm not feeling good today, or I'm this, or I'm that." And so he has access to therapeutic supports that are literally right there. And they are, and this is an IMD exclusion workaround model that, because they have a different, because the clinical staff is separate from the residential staff, you could actually bill Medi-Cal for this model. And that's because they have two different addresses. I mean, it's literally a workaround, but to me, it's the secret sauce. My son needed more than a peer. He loves his peers. He is a great peer. He's doing well, but he needed ongoing medically necessary continuity of care and the support. And he's thriving for the first time in 20 years. So
that's the dream that we would all love to see.
Yes.
So in the remaining minute that we have, tell us how we can find out more about your paper and your mission. Where should we go for additional information besides the article in the New York Times? What can somebody do?
So we have a Facebook page. We've secured a website, but we haven't even set it up for Forever Housing That Heals. We're thinking ahead, maybe, but right now it's just we have Housing That Heals on Facebook. And we also have a Gmail account, housingthatheals @gmail.com.
Okay. And there's on NAMI, there's a link on there as well.
Our paper has been shared, and there's several presentations we've given that are online. If you Google and Google us, you'll see our presentations. Some of them have been recorded. We've been to several NAMIs across California. Treatment Advocacy Center hosted us as well. So so you can find links to our paper online, and it was just, again, the start of a conversation that is absolutely necessary for us all to continue together.
That's awesome. So final words, round robin, and I would just say, don't give up the fight. Our loved ones, whether it's your sibling, your parent, I know it's a little harder when you're a child of someone with schizophrenia, but if you have a loved one with a serious mental illness, they deserve to have community and purpose and structure and love and treatment. And if it can all be provided in Housing That Heals, don't stop fighting for that, I would say. Any other last words from anybody?
Oh, I would just say thank you for doing what you're doing, because again, it's such an important component and it's not talked about enough, and people don't understand that. And I think that the financial model of this is really important too. If communities will understand that this is actually going to save them money to take care of these people. But
absolutely,
again, we're fighting an uphill battle, but thank you for doing what you're doing.
For Mimi, and my final word is, one thing I found out that I didn't know that our listeners should know: when you're dealing with a harm reduction program, there's so much misunderstanding about HIPAA, and we have to explain to providers that they can listen to us and that they can, in an emergency, talk to us and so forth. The same with harm reduction. Harm reduction includes abstinence. And they don't seem to know that. But my son needs abstinence just like yours. He can't deal with a little bit of anything or he's off the rails. So for him, if he's in a harm reduction place, they have to make sure he's abstinent. So that's another education piece we need to do.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, both of you, thank you so much for joining us today. Keep up the good fight. I know you will. And love to your families. And thank you so much. Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches with Randy Kay, Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randykay.com.